I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm Andy Langhurst. I'm the coordinator for the Public Access Room. Others, Alyssa, Lacey, and Keanu are also on the call. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and Keanu will be monitoring that. And the recording will be, or the workshop will be recorded. I'll try to send it out tomorrow. We've also got a sheet of URLs that are used and QR codes. So all that information will be made available to you. I am in an office that the light turns off sometimes, so if you see me waving my hands around, that's what I'm trying to do. But otherwise, we'll get started. Now, this is a lot of content, and this is the first time I've done this presentation, so hopefully the timing works out. But again, the slides will be shared and the notes in the slides will be there, and I'm going to try to cover what I think is the most important part first. So in terms of following the executive budget at the Hawaii State Capitol, this will be our agenda today. The QR code goes to the Public Access Room website, and there'll be a few more QR codes that'll point you to relevant information as we go. I'll start just briefly talking about the Public Access Room. We'll talk about an overview of the budget, and then the bulk of this will be covering the budget bill itself and a little bit about following other money bills or appropriation bills, grant and aid, and if we have time at the end, some information that you can find other information on the legislature's website that might be useful to you. So as many of you probably know, the Public Access Room is the people's access at the Capitol. We're in room 401 on the fourth floor. We love phone calls and emails and people stopping by, and we are happy to answer the same question over and over again because we know this can be a lot, and it really only happens for about 4 months, so it's easy to kind of forget it until we get back into it. So please do contact us. We are available to help, to provide information and training at no charge. We're nonpartisan. We focus on the process, not so much on the policy. So we'll help people on all sides, both sides of an issue. We provide handouts. We've got computers in our office you can use. We've got very cold AC if you're hot, and just generally a place to rest and recharge. And here's a picture. Keanu and I are on the left side, and Alyssa and Lacey are on the right side. And look how eager we are to have you come and visit us. In terms of just kind of an overview, as you know, that Hawaii state government has three equal branches. The legislature makes the law and also crafts or passes the budgets of all the branches. And when we're talking about the budget bill today, we're really going to be focusing on the executive branch budget, and that's going to include the appropriations for the various departments of the state. So for an overview of the budget, here are the budget bills for 2025. There are actually four of them, even though we're going to be focusing on the one I've highlighted in yellow. In addition to the executive budget, there's the budget for the judiciary. There's the budget for the legislature, which will include both the House and the Senate, as well as the Legislative Reference Bureau, of which PAR is a part, the auditors and other agencies, and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. In most cases, the House budget is, or in this case, definitely the House budget is the vehicle that's started. So even though they may have companion bills, it's often the House budget that's going to be the one that goes forward. And like we're on a biennium cycle for bills, we're also a fiscal biennium where it's a 2-year period for the state budget. And in the odd numbered year, this year is the first year of the 2-year term. So here's just some information about the dates that we're talking about. So fiscal year coming up, starting July 1 and ending June 30th of 2026. We could call it fiscal year 26, FY 26, fiscal year 25 to 26. And then the second year, I'll get into this later, is where a supplemental budget can come when adjustments need to be made, since it's hard to anticipate exactly how much is needed. And we'll go from there. So the first year of the biennial session this year, we're passing the General Appropriations Act for the 2-year period. And I'll only be briefly talking about the Supplemental Appropriations Act. We typically do this workshop every year, and so if we do it next year, we'll focus more on what does it look like for that supplemental act that's updating the previous year's budget. And in case you like to look at things more graphically, this is more of a picture view of what we're talking about. So it goes back a number of years, but we're talking about the right side of the screen where we've got the current session with the green arrow. The lines in that 2025 box, the little lines are the legislative session. And we're showing you that the biennium budget is going starting this year, going forward, and going into the next year. Now to the bulk of it, the budget bill. So as you know, the Hawaii State Legislature has both the House and the Senate, and each legislature organizes itself into leadership positions and committees. And the reason I say this or remind you of this is because the committees can be very important in the budget cycle. The Public Access Room has a current legislature webpage. The QR code is in the bottom left. And we create handouts that list all the legislators' names that are on the various committees. So if you wanted to see who's on the House Finance Committee or who's on the Ways and Means Committee or any of the committees, we have this handout that you can refer to. And like bills go through, the money bill will also, it has to pass through all the committees that this House and the Senate has referred it to. It needs to go through 3 readings in both chambers, and it needs to have final agreement on the exact wording at conference at the end of the period, and then be signed or allowed to come into law by the governor. And the budget bills or any other appropriation bills must go through the same process. And if you're curious for more information, HRS Chapter 37 is the part of the HRS that talks about the budget process. Here's another graphical picture if you like seeing things in pictures. The session starts in mid-January, and that's when the budget bill is officially introduced for the legislature. The budget bill needs to be passed by the end of session, which is May 2nd this year. And then the governor signs the bill, and that's when the budget bill is enacted in June or July. But a lot happens before the budget bill is introduced, and we'll start talking about the Council on Revenues, which predicts the future in terms of how much money the state has. So this is the core page, the Council on Revenues website. And what's interesting is there is a Council on Revenues meeting coming up next week where they provide another update on what's anticipated to be available for the budget. So if you're curious to watch that meeting or hear more about what the next update will be, it'll be on Wednesday the 12th. So for the budgeting process, we're really starting at the end of last session. The forecast changed throughout the year, and so we're looking backwards right now to May when they provided a general fund forecast. With that information, over the summer and into September, the executive departments of the state are working with the governor to develop and submit any requests on monetary needs. As it gets into September and there's another core forecast on general funds, then the Department of Budget and Finance will be working with the governor to actually compile their initial budget request, taking all that feedback from the various departments and putting it into a document. And the governor submits the budget bill to the legislature in December, and that's because of a requirement that the budget needs to be submitted no less than 30 days before the start of the legislative session. And it also takes into consideration a multi-year budget, a projected budget that the Office of Budget and Finance will also be working on and has on their website. So the Budget and Finance website, I'll be referring to it a couple times going forward right now, has a lot of information that can be useful. There was a finance hearing yesterday, and trying to figure out what changes they were making, some of the information you might be looking for about what more detail about what the departments had requested might be able to be found on the budget.hawaii.gov website. So it'll include an executive budget summary, things about the program structure, more about a narrative proposed budget, and other information, as you'll see. So here's what the Department of Budget and Finance website looks like. And what we'll be looking at today is going to that budget link at the top right that's circled in green. And then from there, we would click on the executive biennium budget again, because we're in the first year of the budget cycle. If it was next year, we could also look at the executive supplement budget. But looking at that executive biennium budget for fiscal year 25 to 27, it's important to look at the budget brief. That can provide a good overview of what has been prepared and then submitted in terms of budget requests. And this is what that document would look or does look like. And you'll see that it has the December 2024 date, so that it was submitted 30 days or so in advance of the legislative session. And within that executive summary, it's a nice way to learn more about the various departments of the state, what their functions are or their program areas are. So for example, when Chair Yamashita and the Finance Committee is rattling off program areas like LNR 402, we can see that that's related to environmental protection and specifically Native Resources and Fire Protection Program. And so if you are curious to know more about what the departments have documented as what they're trying to accomplish, this executive summary can provide more information, or just a summary of what those different program IDs are. And so from that document, you can see a request for the operating budget. Now, in this case, it's only looking forward. So it's not that we'd have to look other places to see, well, if we've got fiscal year 2026 here, what did fiscal year 2024 or 2023 look like? How has the budget changed over time? But the nice part here is that it's got at the bottom major adjustments in the executive budget request, specific in this case to the Department of Land and Natural Resources. So we can see some information about permanent and temporary positions. We've got the different funding sources or means of financing, and we'll continue to talk about that as we go. And just showing you over time what those requests look like. So if we were looking for the more in-depth information, now I've gone back to the Budget and Finance webpage, and instead of looking at Budget and Brief at the top left, now we can scroll down. And the first thing we could look at is the program structure if we want to see more information about how the budget bill is organized. So this is what the program structure page, or that document that it's linking to, would look like. And within that document, it's telling us that there are 11 major state program areas, and showing us kind of the topical areas that it's covering, 1 to 11. And then going a little bit deeper into the document, if we're looking at O1 for economic development, as these program structure numbers go down on the left side, the one that has the lowest number is the one that has the program ID number on the right. So for example, if I wanted to look at technology and energy at the very bottom, I can see that Hawaii, underneath technology and energy, there's Hawaii Technology Development Corporation. And if I was looking for funding in the budget bill or in the worksheets, I could look at BED 143. So those departments that are involved in this case in economic development, and see how they kind of line up within those program areas. And then I used the example of LNR 402 earlier. And so this is falling under preservation and enhancement. And just, again, laying that out so we can see the different program areas and find out more information. So if I did want to find out more about LNR 402, we could scroll down to DLNR. Oops, sorry. And this time we're going to click on the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and that'll take us to the document specific for that department. In this department, and a lot of these documents, if you don't already do this, we often will just do a Control F once we're in the PDF and search for some of the information. So in this case, I could search for LNR 402. That's just a control find on the PDF and have that page pull up. Or if that didn't work, I could also search for fire protection, for example. And again, this document that's specific to Department of Land and Natural Resources has the columns going back a little bit as well as going forward. And so we can see what are their operating costs. At the very top where it says operating costs with the asterisks, I can see that in the budget request this year, the department is asking to go from 72 and a half full-time employees to 94 employees. And if we're curious to see more information about that, we can continue to look. And then a little bit farther down in the chart, again, we're getting back to the means of financing where we've got the general funds, what's coming out of the Council of Revenues, projections or federal funds or all sorts of letters. And later on, we've got a handout in the public access room that explains all these means of financing and the letters that you'll see in the budget or in the worksheets. And so if I went another page in this Department of Land and Natural Resources document that was created or finalized in December, I can see another narrative or more information about what they're doing, the statement of program objectives, but more specifically in this B section, I can see that we are asking back to those positions that I mentioned. They're asking on item 2, a request for continuous funding for 22 positions. And there was that half a position that was, I don't remember now, it was like 53 and a half to 77 or whatever the number was. There's also item number 6 on the left side is a deletion of a long-term vacant position. So reducing the 0.5. And then in between those numbers are other appropriations requests, and it's got the letters after it. A indicates general funds, and the other letters we'll keep looking at what those other means of financing are. So we can see how they're outlining the changes from the previous budget to the budget that we're talking about right now. And on the left side, I'm sorry, on the right side of the page, a little bit more information about fund requests. So in this case, looking a little bit more in detail of that B section, we can see that item 1, and I put it up at the top of the screen, they're looking at a change in funding. So they're adding N funds and reducing P funds for both fiscal year 25 and 26. And that's where you can see that slash between the two numbers. So for example, on item 1, the N funds amount stays the same for fiscal year 25 and 26, but the P funds are reducing the negative number for the second, or the negative line for the second number. The negative is on you have to go down a line to see the number and then up a line to see the negative. And again, the 22 positions, the amount that they're anticipating for the 2 years to come out of general funds on number 2. So a change in funding. And a change in funding or an addition of funding and a change in funding or addition of funding for a specific project or initiative, the Hawaii Invasive Species Council for the item number 3. And then this page is an older page. This is what we would see if we were looking at an executive supplement where there were adjustments made from what was anticipated in fiscal year 2024 to 2025 and showing that adjustments column where you can see the difference. So that takes us up to early January. The governor has submitted the budget. Now the legislature's money committees will be asking executive departments to brief them on their budget requests in the form of info briefings. And so the money committees will be there. Senate will have their own, their Ways and Means Committee. House will have their own briefings. And they may ask subject matter committees to join as appropriate. And often there may be materials presented. So for example, these documents that we just looked at from the budget and finance page or something else, maybe a PowerPoint presentation that are presented at the informational briefings. And that information may be accessible to you through the info briefing, the agenda. Um, and WAM especially posts the briefing materials to the hearing notice. You can find it many ways. You can call us in the public access room. We can tell you how to find it. You can go to the committee page on the legislature's website, and there's a box where it says hearing notices. And if you make sure to click on show all, it'll show you previous ones. So for example, if I'm looking in the middle of March, it's just going to show me March forward. If I click on show all, it'll show me back to January. If you're looking for a past year's info briefing, we can show you how to go from laws and research to archives. And then from that page, there's a hearing notices. It takes you to more of an HTML page, just a list of files. But again, if you use that Control F that I talked about a little bit ago, you could search for info. You'll still have to open up the files to figure out, was it a WAM briefing for DLNR or a WAM briefing for the Office of the Governor? But at least it narrows it down to just those information briefings if you're looking for the January dates. So the Senate Ways and Means and the House Finance staff are keeping track of a lot of information. They're working long hours for the big picture overview, looking at the details, all the funds, running and rerunning their calculations and their spreadsheets, considering the long-term financial plans, worrying about expenditure ceilings, which are limits that are mandated by the Hawaii Constitution about how much can be spent, or if we're spending more, what needs to be done to be able to do that. And looking at both operating expenses, so what the day-to-day recurring costs are of the department, as well as capital expenditures, so more of the construction-related projects, the non-recurring funding needs. So still in January, the legislative session starts. Both the House Speaker and the Senate President will introduce bills for the executive budget, and they'll be marked as by request. And if you were to look on the legislature's website from reports and lists, you could go to package and look at the governor's package, and it would be there. And then there's also a place on reports and lists where you can look for appropriation bills, so bills that are appropriating money for something, and you can look by appropriations as well. And at the same time in January, there's another Council on Revenues forecast since it happens quarterly. And the money may have changed from what the departments in the governor's office were working on based on the May or the September information. So for this year, the budget bill, as I had on an earlier screen, is HB 300. And historically, by agreement, the House bill is the vehicle or the one that is going to move forward. In the budget bill, you'll find page after page of acronyms and numbers. And PAR's budget decipher sheet, where we've got this green QR code in the upper right, can help you make sense of that. It's a 4-page handout this year. We've got some narrative, more paragraph explanations of the budget. And then we've got 2 pages of a handy budget decipher sheet where we've got the expending agency, the code, since, for example, DAGS, while we call it DAGS, is going to be under AGS in the budget document. It'll also have means of financing. For example, here and this year, there were a few more, and this is taken from HB 300. There were a few more, I think they were federal, mostly federal fund initials or letters listed. And again, the QR code, if you want to go to that budget document, you can also find it from the PAR website. We have a page on the budget, and you can get to the budget document or budget handout from that page. So there's a position ceiling where there's asterisks. The asterisks can indicate the maximum number of FTEs that could be funded by the dollar amount shown, or a double asterisk or a pound, depending on where it is in the budget process for temporary. Again, we looked at LNR 402 earlier, and this is what it looks like on the budget bill. And you can see it says HB 300 on the far right side. It's showing me just the appropriation requests for fiscal year 25 to 26 and fiscal year 26 to 27. It's got it broken out between operating on the left and investment or capital on the underneath that on the left. And then here's where those letters, the A, the N, P, T, U, and C, where I've plugged them in using either HB 300 earlier in the document where it has those letters listed, or using PAR's Budget Decipher handout to find that out. And this is an example, again, this is a 2-year budget. So when the legislature does the supplemental budget, it'll often line out amounts if more funds are needed. So towards the upper right, we can see that 17,556,140 had been requested, and then that was updated to 35 million, and a couple other examples there. So the legislature continues to move the budget bill through. It starts in the House. Finn makes assign program areas to subject matter committees. And I say may because the public access room isn't in the room when Finance and Ways and Means are going through the budget request. So this is our understanding. And the subject matter chairs can submit recommendations to finance. And that's where, if you're working with a department or you're advocating for a group, we're reaching out to those subject matter chairs to advocate for your programs, the initiatives that you're doing that need more money can be useful. As we saw yesterday, Finance had their budget hearing for HB 300. They made changes and now there will be an HD 1. I don't think it's been published yet, although they approved it in the committee. And it'll be submitted to the clerk's office by the budget decking deadline. So right now it needs to have the second reading and the third reading by next week when that budget decking deadline is. And here's where the calendar is. So the budget decking deadline is on the 10th, on Monday next week. And the budget needs to have its third reading done by the 12th so it can cross over to the Senate. So the House will hold its third reading, pass the bill by the budget deadline, and then cross over to the Senate, have the first reading, and get referred to Ways and Means. And yesterday, when Chair Yamashita and others from the committee were reading through the changes, they were reading from the budget worksheet. So he would say page 267, he would rattle off the program ID, say a sequence number. Those pages he was referring to is under Laws and Research on the capital.hawaii.gov page. If you go to budget, 2025 has 3 budget worksheets posted. And in this case, we're looking at the HB 300, the executive budget.
For the governor's office on page 263, Gov 100 sequence 40001, transfer out Office of Wellness and to DHERD. DHERD, House does not concur.
And so, again, when I share this document, you'll be able to look at this more. But here are some references to what you could look at if you were trying to figure out what is he talking about. So we've got the budget worksheets where we had the page 263, Gov 100, sequence 40001, and I've got the URL to the to the budget page, and then you could click on the executive HB 300. You could do a Control F to either look up sequence. You could just do Control F 40001. Their sequence numbers can be reused in the budget, so you need to make sure what comes up is either Gov 100 or HRD, since it was talking about DHERD as well. You could search by GOV 100. The only thing I'll say is sometimes there's a dash or sometimes there's a space, and just kind of keep that in mind when you're searching. So in this case, we could see on page 263, and then on page 341, we could see the HRD 200 to see both sides of that transfer. The second document is going back to the big Budget and Finance Executive Biennium Budget document, and then going underneath that to the Office of the Governor document, which was 13 pages long. and provides a narrative description of the program plan to move the Office of Wellness and Resilience. And then if we looked at HB 300 before, because it's before the HD1 has come out, this was on page 55 of 154, and you could look by the program ID, the expending agency, see the means of financing, but it doesn't break out by the sequence. It doesn't, this HB 300 is showing more of the overall Gov 100. It's not showing the specific sequence about the Office of Wellness and Resiliency or the specific dollars amount. And again, using the Control F or Command F if you've got a Mac to search the document could be helpful. And here's one more example.
Governor's message, HHL 625, sequence 218001, $2 million for personnel services, modified to $1. Governor's message, HHL.
Okay, so in this case, he was referring to governor's message. He didn't say which one. I searched the governor's messages, and I think I might have did a Control F once I was in the list of governor's messages by budget, and it came up. And so from looking at that document, I found it was 9 pages long. I looked up HHL 625, and it was asking for the $2 million for personnel services. There's the budget worksheets again, and you can look at this again once I share the slides to see what information was shared on the budget worksheets. We've got the Department of Budget and Finance, the executive budget, looking at the Department of Hawaii and Homeland's document, which was 25 pages long, to see the narrative that was prepared in December. Now, the reason there was a governor's message is because the request wasn't included in December. They may not have known they needed it, or maybe somebody forgot. I don't know why, but that number wasn't included in the document. And you'll see for the next one, the HB 300 again, needed the GM because it didn't have the additional $2 million. So that's why there was a reference to a governor's message. And I believe in this case, there was, I think he said this was the one that was adjusted to $1. If there are budget bills, individual appropriation bills already for a program, they reduced it to $1 because they don't know if that budget bill is going to go forward, the individual appropriation bill, I should say, or if it's going to be rolled into the bigger one, because they don't want to have it in HB 300 and a separate appropriations bill. So if it turns out that the separate appropriation bill dies, they can readjust the HB 300. But in this case, the dollar is kind of the indicator to them that something else had existed. And this is another older document. This is from 2021. And it's a version because the HD1 worksheets weren't available when I was getting the presentation ready. This is just showing what the language would look like on the budget worksheets for an HD1, where you can see in blue, it says the House does not concur message. So as I mentioned earlier, there will be another Council on Revenue General Fund forecast next week, and the March forecast may have changed the total amount available to be budgeted again. So now WAM has the budget bill. They have the HD1. They can go through the same process of potentially asking subject matter committees to provide their priorities to WAM, and they'll schedule a hearing. And for both hearings, the public is able to provide testimony. The departments certainly do. And the Senate can come back and make changes on their version. And that's when it would become an HB 300, HD1 with the House changes, and then SD1 with the Senate changes, and submitting it to the clerk. And the SD1 may have incorporated some of the individual appropriation bills. And the Senate will have their third reading by the second crossover deadline, and that would happen in April. And so here's an old example of the SD1 from 2021. And so you can see now it says, the top one says Senate concurs. I don't have it highlighted. The bottom one says Senate does not concur. And as they continue to go through, new worksheets will be posted. You can see this one up in the upper left was produced April 9th, probably a few days after. It was probably posted a few days after WAM had their hearing. So, assuming that the budget bill passes or continues to go forward, which this year, which we expect it will, the will have passed in April HB 300 HD1. The Senate will have passed the HD1 SD1 version. The bill will cross back to the House. The House will disagree with changes like they do for kind of as a matter of course, just happens en masse with the changes made by the other chamber. And then that will trigger the conference process where the two parties can come together, two sides can come together. And in this case, it may be all the members of the many committee would be the conferees named. So continuing to follow other money bills. Appropriation bills, and many of you may know this already, but it's often something that the committees do to defect the effective date, where they make it something far in the future so that in conference they can come through and adjust it to something reasonable. But also they may blank out the appropriation in these individual appropriation bills. If it's something where it's critical that this is the amount needed to move forward, whatever project or program is being proposed, they may record that amount in a standing committee report so they don't lose track of it. But they'll put a blank in the appropriation amount. And a lot of that is because they're still determining how much money is available. And they want to make sure that they're not overcommitting funds while they're still figuring out how much they have to spend. The individual appropriation bills may die, but the funding could be incorporated into the budget bill. Note about fiscal bills is any bill with a fiscal implication, an appropriation, or even a commitment or some sort of cost, even if it's not an appropriation, needs to get approval by Fin or WAM chairs in the conference process. And so they need to know that they have the money to give to these bills before they can sign off on it. And so it can be a very nerve-wracking process at the last minute where everybody's waiting to find out. And as I said, the two committees will come together. They'll try to reach agreement on the final version of the bill. It goes to conference, and as it's in conference, they may be finalizing things in HB 300, hopefully getting to an HD1, SD1, CD1, but they may be finalizing things piece by piece as they're getting things done. When the budget bill is, so many pages long, it's more than just a 5 or 10 page individual bill like we see. They have to start somewhere. And so as they're going through conference, you may hear them just agreeing to certain things as they go along, but ultimately the CD1 version of the budget would need to be decked first because it affects the ability of the conference committees to finalize CD1s of any other bills that have appropriations in it. And so once we get through conference or get to conference, there'll be a deadline for non-fiscal bills to get out of conference and a deadline for fiscal bills. The final version in the committee reports must be delivered to the chief clerk office of the chamber by these dates. And they may set specific deadlines as, conference committee negotiations must be concluded by 6. The reports must be signed and reviewed by 9, and the reports must be filed with that final CD1 bill version by, say, 11 or 11:30. And that gets finalized closer to conference. So just a little bit on grants and aid, and this is a little bit looking backwards since the process is already underway. If the legislature is offering GIA or hopes to offer GIA funds, the application shows up on the website under the grant and aid page, which you can find from the laws and research drop-down box. The deadline's traditionally in January. It covers the upcoming fiscal year. So the applications that the Fin and WAM are considering right now is for the year starting July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. And HRS Chapter 42F has more information on grants. And often a member of Fin and WAM are specifically assigned to focus on GIAs. They also may have a member focusing on CIPs. If you're curious, you can view previous year's applications and often awards, although they might be a little inconsistent about whether they're posting a specific GIA award list each year, but Public Access Room can help you find it if it's not easily findable, or let you know who to ask if we can't find it. And they have information briefings so applicants can appear and maybe offer highlights of the request. But we won't know the result until the end of the process, until the conference draft of the budget is finished, again, as they try to figure out how much money is available. So the budget bill needs to pass final reading before the end of session, but it also must go to the governor. It must be transmitted to the governor before other appropriation bills can pass their final reading. So if you are advocating for your department or for a program, you can also advocate to the governor, in addition to advocating to the chairs or the members of the fiscal committees or the members of a subject matter committee. But you can also be asking the governor for the governor's support and trying to highlight why this is important to you and to the state. And this is just a brief overview of what we've discussed. So in the summer into September, the departments are making their request to the governor for the upcoming year. 1 month before session, the governor needs to provide the budget request, that budget bill, to the legislature. In early January, the money committees hold briefings where they invite the departments to talk about their budget requests. When the session starts on the third Wednesday in January, when we have the introduction period, the budget bill will formally be introduced as part of the governor's budget. And then as we go through session, both Finn and WAM will have their public hearings, they'll make amendments, they'll ask for testimony from the public, and they'll come to agreement, potentially with subject matter chairs' input as appropriate. And then the budget bill needs to be passed by the legislature and enacted by the governor, and the process starts again. After the session, you still need to focus on implementation. It doesn't just end there. Just because money is appropriated doesn't mean it'll be released or it'll be spent. So it's important to kind of keep an eye on it. Also important to thank anybody who helped you so you can maintain that relationship and use it to make good changes going forward. And it also can be important to take a step back and debrief either as a group, as yourself, write some notes about what worked, what didn't work, what do you want to focus on next year while the information is fresh in your brain. And you never know who's going to be helpful. So keeping in mind that it's not just the legislators, but it could be their staff that can provide a lot of input, especially staff of legislators that are new for the year. The staff may have more experience if they've worked in other offices in the past, or recognizing that legislators' roles may change. Somebody may have been the committee chair of a committee in a previous year, and now they're a vice chair of a different committee. But listening, learning, asking questions. I always try to tell people that, it doesn't hurt you to ask questions if you're contacting a legislator or contacting their staff to see what they would suggest. People like to be asked, right? When they know what could be helpful, and it can help you learn something. But definitely don't want to burn bridges. So being respectful, acknowledging the work that the committees are doing and how much they're having to juggle, and not just getting frustrated that it's taking so long or that the information shared is hard to follow or vague. And like I said, ask for advice if you've already got a good relationship with a legislator or their staff. Asking what the background is that leads to their positions, trying to understand how legislators approach things, asking for advice where is more or less pressure needed, and just a perspective of what's the bigger picture. It's so easy to get wrapped up in our own specific small issue that maybe we lose track of what the bigger issues are, and you might want to adjust your approach because of that. Okay, I'm just going to show a couple slides related to the legislature's website, so in case we have any other questions, we can look at those. So from capital.hawaii.gov, you can look for the reports and lists, and as I mentioned earlier, Once you go to reports and lists, you can look for appropriations on the left side of the deadline tracking menu. And up at the upper left, you can see where you can pick different years if you want to look back. And this will go back to 2013 if you're looking. You can also see underneath appropriations, a couple lines you could look at measures by package, for example, if you wanted to see the governor's package. Once you get into appropriations, you can search by house, with appropriations entirely or specific general funds, the A fund appropriations, bond funds, different types of appropriations. And then keep in mind is as you look at these reports, like this one has 154 records using the Control F, sorting by the headers. So if you click on current status, if you double click on it, it'll bring the most recent action at the top and put everything that hasn't moved in a while to the very bottom. And that will help you look at what is still moving and kind of ignore the things that may have been introduced but never got a committee referral. And consider that you could save this as a PDF or download it to Excel. You can also look for information in session laws by going to Laws and Research. You can click on one of the budget fields. So in this case, under session laws, I could look by year or I could click on executive budget. And then it lists the executive budgets for each year. And so that'll be the executive budget or the supplemental budget if it is the second of the 2 years. You can also see an index of laws if you select a specific year. So in this case, we've picked 2024. It pops up with this list of every individual act number. And remember that the act numbers are reused each year. So that's why it's important to know which year the act passed. And once you're in the index of the session laws, and this is a PDF, you can do a Control F and look for appropriations and then get a list this way of everything that had an appropriation. So just a lot of different ways to look at the information. And PAR can help. We have handy lists. We'll post this video. We've got the budget decipher sheet that I mentioned. If you're not on our email list, you can join on our website. And you can call and email us because sometimes we can help you find the information more quickly because it can be very frustrating to look at, the information on the budget and finance page, the worksheets, the HB 300, and then you get drafts. So we're happy to help with that. And there's the information about the public access room. Don't forget to follow us on social media if you're not already. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and then there's our YouTube channel as well. So I know that was a lot of information, probably a fire hose times 10, but hopefully you'll be able to watch this again. We'll share the slides, and then I have a list of URLs and QR codes. Are there any questions that anybody has? Yeah, Janet, you're muted right now.
I would be interested to look up how much federal funding is currently budgeted for the MedQuest program.
That may be something where you need to go to Finance or Ways and Means to ask for it. We have the appropriations page where you can look at general funds or general bond obligations, but I don't think it has a list of federal funds, although I imagine that they're looking at that very closely. Do you have any ideas, Kano?
Yeah, no, I would defer to the money committee staff regarding federal funding.
Okay, thank you.
Andy, we did get a question about from Jody. I
Okay.
shared the link of where people can find the GAA applications for past years. It just goes back to 2011. That's in the chat, so you can click on the that link and just select the year that you want to see the applications. She was asking if GIAs get inserted into the executive budget bill, which they do. I'm not sure if there's a budget code. I don't remember.
I think when we usually look for it, we just do a Control F for 42F, and then
Yeah.
there's usually a list underneath there on the budget bill. Jermaine, did you have a question?
Yes, please. So my question is two-part. So my first part is, I understand that my legislature, Senate, Senator and Representative, they submit CIP projects, a bill for what they want for their community. And so how can I find that? That's the first question. And then the second question, second part to that is, after they submit it, how can I, at the end of legislature, how can I determine or how can I find if any of those capital improvement appropriations projects got approved for the final budget so that I know, like, for example, we need our gym to be re-roofed or something. And so, of course, we ask our senator, how do I know when she puts it into her, you know, her bill to request for those things for our community? And then secondly, how do I know that the finance and budget WAM committees had approved it and the governor had approved it, to be on the budget, or even that it's on the budget and then it gets approved at the end of it? How do I find it? So all those projects that were on my senator's bills and for appropriations for CIP, and then all those on my House side, my House of Representatives. How do I get that?
Keanu, do you mind taking that one?
Yeah. So legislators are allowed to introduce capital improvement project bills. Those are just wish lists of all the projects that they want to fund with state funding in their districts. So they get introduced like regular bills, right? It goes through a first reading, it gets referred to the money committees, but those bills don't move through the process. What happens is that legislators, senators and representatives will prioritize usually their top 3 projects within that wish list, and they'll send it off to the WAM and FIN committees, and hopefully those get incorporated into the budget. But how you can find out what they introduced is if you know who your legislators are, on the reports and list page, there is a link or a tab to check what measures your legislators introduced, and it's called measures by introducer. So then it brings up a link where you can look for your senator or representative to see the bills that they introduced, and just click on the first primary introducer. That will bring up a list, and you usually listed as capital improvement project or CAP. You can just either look for that or do a Control F on your keyboard to find the CAP bill. And so those will be all the requests that they've made. Whether or not it gets into the budget, we'll have to wait until after the final version is done with the CD1, and you can look for the project. For example, if the funding request is a gymnasium for a school, when the CD version of the budget gets passed out, you can do a Control Find right on your keyboard and just select the school, and it'll highlight where in that 572 pages of the budget bill that appropriation is listed. So you can find it in the budget bill, but you can also contact your legislators' offices because they'll know whether or not it's in there. Yeah, but we need to wait for the final version because it could be put in early and then taken out. So it's always after the CD1 is released where you can find everything that's going to be in the budget. And then feel free to give us a call too, and we could show you exactly where to look on the website to find out your CIP, the CIP bills that your legislators introduced, if they introduce one, because not everybody introduces one. So we'll be happy to help you find that, and then call us back after the CD1 is issued, and we can help you look on the budget bill, to see if those appropriations were funded by the legislature.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will do that for sure.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, well, please follow up with us if you think of anything later. Be on the lookout in your emails. I'll send it to everybody that registered, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, but certainly by Monday. The recording, the slides, and then the reference sheet that we have.
Thank you.
Ray, I see your question about do federal funds require a match? I'm not familiar with that. Do you know, Keanu? I think I'm too new to know that answer to that.
I'm not sure if it's required. Yeah, I'm not sure. You might want to check with the money committees for that. It's a good question, though. I'd like to know.
Okay, thank you everybody for your time today.